Lesson 30 is about deductive reasoning. And the first thing we're going to do on examples 1 and 2 is we're going to use some deductive reasoning using the Law of Syllogism. And the Law of Syllogism starts off with a major premise. And this is what your parents like to call the grounded thing. If you don't clean your room, then you will get grounded.
Yeah, my mom would say that.
All right. Or if you don't clean up this mess that you just made, then you will lose your phone. If you don't get your grades up, then you will be in big trouble. All right, so if A happens, then B happens. We'll call that the major premise. Sometimes it's called a threat. I think that's how a lot of high school students take that type of phrase. But anyway, if something happens, it leads to something else happening. So it's just it's a rule of nature. All right? And then the minor premise is something happens. The first thing, the A part happens. The conclusion, then B happens. That's the Law of Syllogism. So a law has been stated in the world of man. If, here we go. If the Elkhorn Valley Falcons win their next 2 games, then they will make it to the playoffs. Right? The football team. Right? If we win the next 2 games, then we will make the playoffs. So, if we win the next 2 games, what can we logically conclude?
We'll go to playoffs. We'll
go to the playoffs. So that's how it works. We state some law. If something happens, something else has to happen. And the first thing ends up happening, we can conclude the second thing happens. That's called valid reasoning. Deductive reasoning. All right? And this lesson's not going to sound like math today. I forgot to mention that. It's logic. Logic is a branch of mathematics, but it's not going to be like all 2 + 2 = 4 and stuff. It's going to be more thought-provoking than that. All right, so let's take a look at some deductive reasoning issues. We want to determine the validity of an argument, and the validity of the argument is based on the Law of Syllogism. Okay? And the Law of Syllogism, again, is 3 pieces: major premise, minor premise, and they usually put a bar here followed by a conclusion. Okay, so that's what you should expect each of these problems: major premise, minor premise, conclusion. And the validity for right now is only going to be based on Law of Syllogism. There's some other ways to make things valid, but we're not going to deal with those right now. The major premise is sometimes written in if-then form. Sometimes it's a categorical statement. A categorical statement would be all things of this type have this characteristic. All squares have the characteristic that they are rectangles. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to change everything to if-then form, because if-then form is a lot easier. So, all squares are rectangles if square, then rectangle. We are not an English class, so I'm not going to be using verbs all the time. All right? Don't let your English teacher see this video. All right? If square, then rectangle. If you're an English aficionado, if an object is a square, comma, then it is also a rectangle. All right, but we want to get the whole idea here. What's the hypothesis, the if part? What's the then part, the conclusion? All right. So the category is the if part. The characteristic is the then part. All dogs have tails. If dog, then tail. All high school students love homework. If high school student, then loves homework. That's probably not a true one, but anyway. But again, a category of thing has a certain characteristic. All right. So the second thing to look at is the minor premise. Quadrilateral ABCD is a square. So in order to do any kind of logical reasoning, the minor premise, whatever this states, has to verify that thing, the first thing. If something, okay, so whatever the first thing is, that's what this has to state. And notice, ABCD is a square. Hey, look, we have a square. Okay, what does it say about squares? Squares are also rectangles. So the logical conclusion from this minor premise is that ABCD is a rectangle, which you can see it says that. That's what valid reasoning looks like. Okay. What I'd want to see on your paper for this problem, as far as demonstrating that you understand what's going on. I want to see where you took the categorical statement and wrote it into an if-then form. I can believe that you can go through the thought processes there without writing stuff down to establish valid for that. But again, I want to see if it's a categorical statement, I want to see where you transformed it into an if-then statement. And again, as long as this is that and this is that, then that's valid. If this said quadrilateral ABCD is a square, quadrilateral ABCD is a triangle, that'd be invalid, right? Because it's not the logical conclusion from the minor premise. All right, so that's one way of invalid happening, but we'll see invalid here in a minute.